To the graduates of San Francisco State University School of Music, Class of 2020, bravo for your tremendous accomplishment, and congratulations to you and to the families and professors who have supported and accompanied you through this life-changing experience. My name is Kent Nagano, and I speak to you today from here in Paris, where my family and I have been under lockdown for the past 3 months. But instead, I have the honor of speaking to you virtually today as a fellow San Francisco State University graduate, class of 1976. 44 years ago was America's bicentennial year. It saw the premiere of Leonard Bernstein's opera, 2600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and witnessed the aftermath of President Nixon's resignation and confronted the closing chapters of the Vietnam War. It also was the time marked by economic instability and the eve of the infamous Proposition 13, whose passage resulted in draconian budget cuts in education and with it, the arts. 1976 was a pivotal moment of socioeconomic fragility, similar to the world which we, you, are facing now. Among today's graduates, you as musicians, however, are in an exceptional position. On one hand, you have the talent and the training to offer something society desperately needs and wants. Your work is an essential part of a rich culture, which is more than can be said of many other professions. The power and possibilities of music are limitless, especially in times of uncertainty or crisis, such as today's pandemic. On the other hand, you have decided to enter into the most demanding professions of all, one which is less structured or predictable than most, and in doing so, you will face challenges. It is a discipline more competitive, more open to subjective judgment, and more harshly evaluated under the weight of a tradition spanning some 250 years, a tradition which represents our identity as a society. Music also demands extraordinary amounts of time, effort, sacrifice, and self-discipline, such that, ironically, at a time when the whole world is collectively chafing under home sheltering, isolation, and social distancing, we musicians find such limitations completely normal. The endless hours in the practice studio, the writing, the studying, all in isolation, is well known to each of us. Moreover, we musicians choose to accept and respect the authority and knowledge of professors in order to master great traditions at a time where the trends towards informality and flexibility are growing. Regarding this final point, it is important to remember that our school, San Francisco State University, has a very special tradition of training the professional musician. While other universities and conservatories may focus intensively upon certain aspects of music, for example, solo performance, San Francisco State has always emphasized teaching the foundations of the entire music profession. This tradition is nationally recognized for its excellence, and is what I credit as a critical point of preparation for my own career in professional music. In 1974, Laszlo Varga, the legendary Hungarian virtuoso cellist and conductor, accepted me as his student. Renowned for his temper and intolerance of mediocrity, he demanded impeccable preparation for all his classes. And during every lesson, however, it seemed as if he was particularly impatient with my work, and moreover, demanded unusually challenging assignments from me, usually at the last minute. For example, at one class, we were to play the full score of a symphonic work at the piano while simultaneously conducting. Fellow students were given a choice of a Bach chorale or an early Mozart symphony, after which Mr. Varga would offer constructive advice. But when my turn came, he unexpectedly asked me to sight read, play and conduct the finale of Igor Stravinsky's Sacre du Printemps, after which he launched into unfiltered criticism, dwelled upon the wrong note, the wrong rhythm, berating a missed pitch, scolding insufficient preparation, and generously sharing his overall disappointment. It was discouraging, if not bordering upon traumatic, to say the least, but it did have an effect. Even though it was too late for the class, afterwards I went home and practiced that passage late into the night until I had perfected it, just to prove to myself that it could be done. Imagine my surprise when the next week I discovered that Mr. Varga had requested me as his TA and assistant conductor for the following year. While grueling and at times decidedly unpleasant, over the next academic year I gradually grew accustomed to flawless technical execution and superior performance standards as the norm. Compliments and praise were neither expected nor did they come. However, clearly a deep bond of trust and shared value system had been formed. The pertinence of what I had learned at San Francisco State was becoming increasingly evident as my professional career developed. It was Mr. Varga with whom I regularly consulted over the next 35 years. We drew extremely close, and he became a treasured confidant up until his passing a few years ago. Like so many of San Francisco State's brilliant faculty, Mr. Varga was a superb teacher, not only in our specialized field, but in guiding our evolution towards maturity and teaching us to shoulder the expectations of leadership. During that time, when the trends of entitlement and immediate gratification were becoming commonplace, he contrarily encouraged us as musicians to accept a societal responsibility each time we performed, that it was our duty, through the universal language of music, to lift the heavy barriers of division such that people of different backgrounds and cultures could collectively be touched, moved, and stimulated, to be allowed to imagine an ideal world. Finally, Mr. Varga made clear that for a musician, a well-earned diploma, far from being the end, signaled only the new beginning of an exciting journey meant to last a lifetime. And so, how do we go forward? What is important? Today we are in a time when all too often political leaders ask whether classical music is even relevant. Some go as far as to suggest that music is only for an elite segment of this society, a segment with education, leisure, and the economic means to participate and support something very expensive and non-representational of the people. Who will remind these politicians that music is a metaphor for life, and if so, that an orchestra is a metaphor for the ideal society? An orchestra is where all people of different backgrounds, nationalities, race, and religion come together and share their uniquely special talents to accomplish a goal far greater than what is possible by any single individual. And who will explain to them that if they do not have a connection with Mozart, it is certainly not the fault of Mozart? Last year, I toured the Arctic Circle with the Montreal Symphony to play for the Indigenous peoples in the polar regions of northern Canada in order to help address the controversial, racially prejudiced atrocities of past federal policies. The Inuits there had never heard classical music, nor had they ever seen a European musical instrument. On tour, we performed several works, some utilizing the local language, others with ties to the Inuit and Cree folklore, and some in collaboration with indigenous folk musicians. But most importantly, we took a Mozart symphony as representative of our core repertoire. The audiences throughout Nunavik filled the venues, and they were deeply affected by our music. While we played, their children danced, ran joyfully around, jumped up and down, pointed fingers, and threw popcorn in the air. Between movements, the adults excitedly compared notes with one another, perhaps in the same way that European audiences of the 15th century responded to a performance of Shakespeare, or later, how the public might have reacted to the premiere of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. While the various audiences in the Arctic responded differently to each of the works, who was the composer unanimously popular and wildly applauded with such great enthusiasm at the end? It was, of course, Mozart. In hearing his music for the first time in their lives, every person spontaneously fell in love and became enraptured by its sublime beauty. In a world where, for the overwhelming majority of people in our country, classical music simply has no meaning, it is not possible for them to say whether or not they enjoy Mozart's music. Like the Inuit of the Great North, they have never heard or had access to it. And so who will find the right way to offer our communities the hope and stimulation of the humanism lying within these masterpieces? Well, class of 2020, should you choose it, this challenge falls upon your shoulders. We live in a world where things tend to be measured in terms of speed and efficiency, in profit margins and return on investment. Quality is often solely measured in numbers, statistics, titles, or defined through the lens of artificial virtual reality. We as musicians know one can always impress with flashy things and special effects. We can feign casual and effortless boredom while belittling that of poetic refinement and beauty and profundity. It is easy to find beauty, in fact, by airbrushing a portrait or photoshopping a smartphone image. But one does not need to be a musician to remark upon how quickly things tied to fashion become obsolete. Like a popular internet application or new electronic device, all things tied to novelty quickly disappear. But music does not disappear. It flies above time. Johann Sebastian Bach's Goldberg variations remain as relevant in 2020 as they were in 1741. Will the audiences for classical music stay with us? Well, it is tempting to simply explain that today's audiences are simply different. Thankfully, they tend not to be as different as we might think. In fact, in many ways, they are more sophisticated and educated than ever before. If we as artists ever underestimate our public, we will do so at our own peril. Anthropology has shown that times and fashions do change, but overall human beings do not. Every generation rightly has an instinctive intolerance and impatience with the previous generation's tendency towards status quo, compromise, accepting less than superior quality, and underestimating the capacity of its youth. In the future, I am absolutely sure that classical music will not only live on, it will thrive and flourish. As a music director, I have seen so many talented, educated, sophisticated, and well-trained musicians coming into our profession. Also, there is a sort of renaissance in composition, led by a wave of deeply gifted, genius creators. All of this gives confidence and great hope for the future of classical music. And beyond music itself, will today's 20th century structures and institutions of professional music also survive into the 21st century? Well, it is you graduates of 2020 who must and will address this question. And in doing so, you will provide the leadership and the way in carrying our great tradition into the future and confirming its universal relevance. This leadership will not always come easily. There will be times as musicians when we will pass through moments of uncertainty, when facing fierce competition or politically motivated criticism, we might lose trust in ourselves at times. It is only human. When this moment comes, and it will, I encourage you to believe in your own talent, to accept the risks that come with leadership and courage. Remember the parable of the 10 talents? In this story, a master had 3 employee servants. As a sign of his confidence, when he leaves for a long voyage, he gives talents, or gold coins, to each one of them. The first worked very hard and increased the worth of the talents many times over. The second invested wisely and multiplied the sums of the original talents. But the third, who was afraid of potentially losing the money and had no desire to work, so instead he buried the money to avoid any possible risk. The master returned and was proud of his first servant and very pleased with the second servant. However, with the third, the master was deeply disappointed and angrily criticized the servant for being lazy and idle. This parable then is really concerned with the actions of the servants. It was not about the possession of the talents that determined their reward or their punishment. It was how they used them. Everyone is given talent at birth, and each of us is responsible for what we do with it. And today, as you enter a world where people are thirsty and hungry for the truth, who have a need for those unquantifiable qualities in life which go beyond the banality of the superficial. Through San Francisco State University, today you graduate with a firm foundation reflecting the proud traditions of our school. Your diploma signals a rigorous training and has stretched your abilities far beyond what is normal, human limitations. You graduate as a part of a selected few whose talents and skill represent the exceptional. Congratulations to you, graduates of San Francisco State University, School of Music 2020, for all you have accomplished and worked for. We look to you to lead us towards the future of new horizons. On behalf of all who love music, I wish you much success for your exciting future, which you deserve, and all the happiness and fulfillment that comes from sharing your music with others.